welcome. My name is Sir Banks. I'm your host for Innovative Cities. Each week we talk about issues that affect our cities and we find solutions on how to make our cities better and most prosperous to our children and the next generation. Today I have Nicole with me. She is an architect. She's a leader of a firm who specializes in gas stations and more, not just gas stations. So Nicole, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Thank you, Isra, for having me on. So I'm an architect in Arizona. My firm is KE Design. I took over full ownership at the beginning of 2021. Previously, I'd been K Engineering in Design, where I'd been a partner for 5 years previously with an engineer that has been in the fuel industry doing buildings and field projects for 50 years. And so I gained a lot of experience working with him for nearly 20 years, learning from him. And then he decided it was time to retire and enjoy his life, and at least mostly retire. We still drag him back for projects here and there. But his specialty had always been gas stations. He did modular buildings, fuel design, fuel canopies. And so I really found that aspect in the technical side of that whole industry really fascinating when I started working with him. It's stuff that we all use every single day. We all go to the gas stations every day. We go to convenience stores every day, but we never really think about them. You have them on every corner some places. And so it's really this overlooked part of our everyday life that has a lot of impact on what we do and a lot of details that go into that whole industry.
Tell us more about what these things mean. What are the technical and engineering things that fascinated you?
A lot of it, I like the technical side of the fuel design itself. It's more simple than what I would have imagined it to be, but there's still a lot of, you have codes because you do have hazardous materials, and you have to look at capacities of all of it and what's the use of all of these things. And it's always changing. That's especially the last several years, the whole industry of fuel is changing. We're moving more to green energies. They're looking for alternative fuels and more sustainable fuels. And it's something that's been talked about for decades on, are we going to get more sustainable vehicles and more sustainable energy? And it's only over the last several years, we're actually starting to see the push to put that into action.
Okay, tell us more about electric vehicle charging, Evie.
So that's one of the things that we are seeing a bigger push finally coming in. We're seeing the electric cars being promoted more. You have your Teslas and all the other big manufacturers are starting to come out with their electric vehicle cars. You're starting to see most of the vehicle manufacturers are putting out there these promises of within 10 years or 15 years, they want to be completely electric vehicle. And so this is a whole new infrastructure that doesn't really exist in our system. You figure all of our utility technology, our electrical, our water, our sewer, it's all there. It's been there for forever. And not really forever, but
for a century.
Yeah, for all of our generations and more. And so seeing it completely change and a whole new aspect come into it, I guess previous generations, they saw the transition going from leaded gas to unleaded gas and some of that stuff that changed. But, and I know earlier in my career, there was the push for E85 fuels coming in, and it didn't really happen. But we're finally seeing with the electric vehicles, the infrastructure is starting to move in that direction. The legislation's there to help push it along. The car companies are finally taking the actions to transform. The technology is improved enough that the batteries and stuff like that, and the technology is cheap enough to start getting it there. And we're finally seeing these fuel companies get on board with, let's put charging stations in the gas stations.
Yes.
Pretty much any new projects we're doing lately, we're seeing it, whether it's the independent guys, the big corporate chains are starting to implement them and plan for them. I know internationally, they're doing more of it too. Europe has a lot of them that they're doing. And it's starting to take effect here. With car charging, with the electric cars, one of the biggest issues that studies have shown that most people have with switching to electric vehicles is there's not enough charging stations. The infrastructure isn't there. It's not convenient enough that they don't want to have to drive all the way across town to charge their car. If you're taking a road trip, you need to make sure that you can stop regularly and charge your car, and that you're counting for the time on that, and there's fast enough chargers for it, because nobody wants to sit there for hours waiting for their car to charge when they're in the middle of a road trip. So you need to have the fast chargers to go with it. And we're finally starting to see that happen, where they're getting them more regularly located. Office buildings are putting them, public parking starting to putting them, the gas station industry is jumping on where they're starting to put them on their sites, because if people aren't driving gas vehicles, they want to stay in the picture and stay relevant to the vehicle industry. So they're trying to figure out how they can stay relevant in that and starting to include it in their plans going forward.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of affordability, how affordable electric charging and the retrofit that you're doing for the gas stations? Is it like what kind of cost increase do you see when compared with a normal gas station and a gas station that is probably hybrid?
Really, the cost for the gas station is not that drastic. The biggest cost is if they need to increase their electrical capacity getting to the site, which we've had several sites that we've been working on doing that, where they don't have a big enough electric service to the site, where they need to increase that with plans for putting the charger, because these chargers do take up a lot of power when they're running them. And if you want to have multiple chargers, then so that people can do it, you need to make sure you have the capacity on your site to do that. So in something like that, it's probably $50,000 to $100,000 investment for it to come in. A lot of the older sites that we're seeing, you get into a problem where space. They have limited parking on some of these sites. The new fuel station sites and convenience stores are usually getting huge parking areas, lots of spaces that they can afford to give up one or two to charging. Some of these smaller old sites, you may only have 5 or 6 parking spaces on the site. So utilizing those,
especially in cities when it's, let's say if we're in Boston or New York and you need to charge your car and spend, let's say 20 minutes is the time to charge.
Yeah.
So that's a lot.
Yeah, and you're using up that space for potential customers. So there's challenges with that too, on is it worth the cost to give up that site design? And a lot of times if you have that smaller site, you're going to have regular customers parking in it. And so if somebody comes to charge, that space may not be available. So there's other constraints that go along with that too, but the cost wise isn't too bad. Most sites, especially if it's a new station, they can implement them pretty easily with the electrical. And the bigger issue on it is going to be making sure that that electricity can be there, and that the power company can provide the needs for that type of electrical usage.
Mm-hmm. So Nicole, tell us about hydrogen technology and why is it important for trucks in particular?
That's the other one I kind of see that it's kind of hidden in the background with all of our vehicle technology. You don't hear it talked about a whole lot. So the electric vehicles everybody talks about it. Everybody wants their Teslas and electric cars. And they typically, most electric cars, price-wise, are pretty comparable to your gas-powered cars now. And they will go, average range is about 250 miles. If you have semi-trucks and delivery trucks, first of all, with the weight on them, they're not going to get their 250 miles, but you don't want a truck driver stopping to every 100 miles to have to stop and take a hour, whatever, charging. So electrical technology is not as feasible for our long range and heavy duty vehicles, which, as we know these days, we're seeing more of, there's a shortage of truck drivers, and we're seeing delivery and supply interruptions because of COVID and the lack of all of that. So that we're seeing the effects of how important that supply chain is and how important that transportation is, and making sure we can get things efficiently. And so having a technology that does not work for the long range causes problems. So we're seeing a lot of in the background of the development of the hydrogen fuel cells. Several years ago, it had been talked about, then it kind of got pushed aside, and it's kind of in the background mainly for the long distance and heavy duty vehicles. because it can run, a tank is about 600 miles, which is comparable to what they're running on right now. And it would fill up in the same amount of time that their current diesel gas tanks fill up. So, but it's going to be cleaner than running off of fuel. So the technology's still working on it, still not perfected or quite as advanced on that. But they are, right now, there's several car companies that are putting them into production and testing, and they actually have them out on the roads testing. So there's definitely promise for that. And I think we're going to see more of that coming up in the future with the bigger vehicles, and maybe even for the personal small vehicles as that infrastructure gets out there.
Wow.
The biggest issue with that is because there's a whole nother new technology, we still need to have the ability in the stations to fill up with hydrogen then. So it's going to be, will the gas station and fuel companies start adding that into their services too, where we're going to end up having unleaded, electric, hydrogen, diesel, biodiesel, all at the same sites. Lots of possibilities. I think we will end up seeing a mix of several of them.
Wow, interesting. That's amazing. Interesting information. So we have, electric cars, hydrogen cars, and probably is it going to be under one umbrella, different sites? So is it time to, let's say, charge a hydrogen vehicle would take the same time as a?
Yeah, so the hydrogen ones, it really is more similar to filling up a gas tank. And then it's more in the technology of the system that converts that hydrogen over to an energy source. So it won't have the fill up or like sitting there charging. It's just going to be fill up the hydrogen tank and keep going. So it's an easier transition for that long range stuff, but the technology still needs to get a little bit more efficient on that. Same thing with our car charging batteries. Those still need to be more efficient because I'm sure people want to go farther than their 250 miles between charges. And I know some of the stuff I'm seeing, there is range anxiety. People get scared about the electric cars because they worry, even if they're only driving in town and typically not getting anywhere near their limit, they still always have that fear of what happens if my battery burns out.
Yeah. I worry about my car, which is not electric, normal gas.
Yeah.
Sometimes I see the red sign. I was like, okay, it's gonna stop.
Yeah. But at least with the fuel, you know that there's gas stations usually fairly close around. When you're looking for a car charging station, that they're not everywhere yet, that anxiety gets increased of you don't know where you can fill up at or recharge at.
Yeah, definitely. So Nicole, tell us how that's going to affect the housing market in terms of multifamily housing. I probably assumed would be easier, and then the single family housing where we have lots of older houses and the electricity configuration is completely different and probably going to increase their voltage or something.
I think the biggest thing with that is going to be the availability of the chargers and of the electricity. With your multifamily, you have more parking spaces. So I think it's something that we're going to have to start seeing apartments and condos that they're going to have to start including that. Otherwise, they're limiting potential customers if they don't have anywhere to charge. Most charging systems, if you were to plug into your standard house 120 volt electrical, it's going to take 30 to 40 hours to charge your car to full. So your standard electrical outlet, it can charge your car, but it's not really feasible or efficient to do it. Most of the houses need 240 volt, which is basically the same outlet that's on your washing machine and dryer. But that still is a different wire and a different outlet. So you need to have an electrician come in and install that. And that'll charge your car in 8 to 10 hours for your typical electric vehicle.
Wow.
So it's an overnight charge to get it. What you are going to see commercially is going to be more of the fast chargers that will do 20 to 30 minute charges. Because nobody wants to sit around unless it's in an office building or something like that, nobody wants to spend 8 hours at Target or at a gas station or even a restaurant. So you need something at those ones. They're going to have to be the high powered ones. So even in the houses, it requires pretty minimal work for getting an electrician in there. They usually are going to need a 50 amp electrical circuit. Older houses up until like 20, 30 years ago, it was not uncommon to have 100 amps or less for your total electrical service. So putting in this car charger, that's half of your electrical. They run at about 30 amps or less, something like that. So if you're sitting there charging your car and you have your air conditioning running and all your other stuff running, it could overload your system. Or what's going to happen, these are kind of, the chargers are on a metered system where if it's getting overloaded, it's just going to start drawing less. It's not going to overload your system or cause any hazards, but that means your car is going to charge a lot slower. Current houses will have 200 amps, maybe 400 amps if it's bigger homes. So there's a little bit more capacity for that. But even then, if you have a married couple if they both have an electric car, you're looking at 60 to 100 amps on your 200 amp service. So it definitely can take a draw on what your usage is, and you need to look at what you're running at your house at that time. And I think as the technology expands, where you're going to have you have houses that have 2, 3, 4 cars. If you have people trying to charge 4 cars all at the same time, it's going to require advances in the electrical that's going to your house to be able to accommodate that.
That would also probably increase energy bills.
Yeah, it does increase the energy bills because you're not paying gas, so you don't have that cost. So it's transitioning over, and that's one of the things that it kind of, depending on where you're at, you're going to have different rates on your power, of course, and different times of day have different rates for most stuff. I know I've seen some stuff online. Somebody had sent me an article a while back that had all these figures about how much it costs to charge your electric car versus doing a gas car. And they were saying, like, the numbers they had were saying that your average cost for electrical at home was like $1 something per kilowatt. The US average is like 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So there's some misinformation to try and skew numbers on that. In total, your cost really does come down to, it's about half of what you would pay in your electric bill versus what you would pay in gas. So your overall cost for usage really is cheaper with an electric car in most places. Some areas are going to have higher electric costs. I know California is definitely higher. On your two coasts usually have higher costs. Hawaii is extremely expensive, and Alaska are expensive because they're not in the continental US. So those areas, your payoff on it probably would not be quite as big. But most of the time you are going to save money by having an electric car. And the cost of the vehicles now are comparable, so that even that cost comes into it. I know a lot of people also, the big concern, everybody wants to switch to electric cars to reduce your carbon footprint and save the earth and stuff like that. And I know that's one of the other things that I've looked at studies on, of where your power, how you're, like, wherever you're located, what are the sources of power that are primary for your area. If you're in an area that still primarily runs off of coal power, your carbon footprint, because of the cost to create the energy and the transportation of all of that and the lines and everything that goes into it, it really is not, it kind of balances out that you're not really saving the environment if you're if your power source is a less sustainable source. Some areas that are using more solar or wind power, especially high water power, that's usually the most cleanest and efficient to go off of. Those ones, you are going to get a better payoff on the carbon footprint. It usually ends up being 3 to 5 years to hit that carbon footprint balance. So if you take and buy a new electric car every 5 years, you probably aren't saving the earth all that much, especially if you're in an area that isn't using efficient fueling sources. So there's some of that impact too on it, that the cost to create that technology and to transport the resources. And one of the other impacts with that is lithium batteries are not the cleanest source of power. The mining process is not easy. It uses a lot of water. So if in areas that may not have that water resource, it can cause problems. It does have some toxicity to it. So as far as the overall energy or carbon footprint of it, there's some of those concerns too. And then disposal of it is always a problem, where is it being disposed of properly? Most of them end up in the landfill.
Yeah.
And so that's one of those concerns we kind of see going with it too. The biggest sources for the lithium are Australia's turned into one of the biggest ones. South America has the largest resource of lithium available, but they aren't the biggest producers of it because they actually don't have the water resources that are needed to run a lot of it. And I know I've seen some stuff talking about their farmers are starting to have droughts because of the waters being used for the lithium mining.
Interesting.
So there's concerns on that it requires this large use of water, but it contaminates the water in the process. China's a big producer of it too, of the lithium mine. So we have very little of it made in the US. So that's another impact of it too, that we're trying to get away from the fuel industry because we don't want to be dependent on international petroleum, but we're switching to sources that are still international sources. And still not the cleanest technology either. But all of those, I think, are advancing and we're getting improvements on it. And they're figuring out how to be able to recycle the batteries better and take those components apart and dispose of them properly. So hopefully they keep those advancements coming.
Yeah, definitely. We're taking big leaps now.
Yes.
Tell me about the gas stations. You mentioned maybe we're gonna have 3 sort of energy and gas station. Probably we're gonna propose a new name. I don't know. I was thinking about what could the gas station, energy station, like energy kiosk. Yeah. And you also mentioned before, you told me about people have to wait. So probably in Europe, you probably want to tell us a bit about that.
Yep. So yeah, and we are starting to see some of that change in the thinking and the naming already, where there's some of these national petroleum associations are starting to change their names to their energy associations and things like that. So we're starting to see them taking on that bigger picture and encompassing more than just the petroleum industry. And we haven't seen that in our gas stations yet, but I think that once they do start doing that, it very well could change to what we end up referring to them as something completely different, because it's not just gas. It might be our energy stations, or I don't know if we still refer to them all as fuel, or probably not. So I think that there will be some changes in the way we're looking at that too. But then, yeah, like we're saying, if you're sitting there for 20 minutes charging, you want to be at a place that you want to sit there for 20 minutes. Are you going to sit there in your car? Do you want to go into the store? Are you going to shop? Which of course they're going to want you to come in and spend money while you're waiting 20 minutes. I know in the US, I see a lot of variation in the marketing of the different gas station chains. You have some of them that are low overhead, but they're on every single corner. There's some of them that put more focus on customer service. And as soon as you walk in, they're going to say hi to you, and they're keep more staff, always somebody mopping the floor every second you go in there. So they look more at the upkeep, but there's less locations. And everybody kind of has their preferences. I think everybody I've talked to, they have their preferred gas station to go to for one reason or another. Some of them they'll go to because that one's quick and it's right there, and they'll go there every day. And most gas station customers, they go by habit. They usually will go to the same station all the time. They have their 1 or 2 favorites, and unless they're driving out of town, they go back to the same place and are repeat customers. You're going to go get your coffee from the same gas station every morning. So they need to keep those customers, but you want to try and make sure that those new people that are charging cars are going to come into your store and make sure that they stay there. So I think we're going to see a shift in our perception of convenience stores and what they're offering. I know we're across the country, we're seeing a big change in the food service that they're doing. A lot of them are tending to put in more food service offerings, put in restaurants into them, which over the many, many years, that's always one that restaurants will go in and then they come out, and then they go back in and they come out. And the industry and the customers can't really decide whether we want to eat at gas stations or not. And it works and then it doesn't work. And so that one always seems to flop back and forth, I think.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I don't mind eating in a gas station.
Yeah. Yeah. I know in Europe, like they're doing much better at implementing the electric cars at this point in the charging stations. And I know Norway's got a lot of them that they're putting in, and they're doing it. But a lot of their the international convenience stores are a different culture. They're more of a neighborhood market or a cafe type feel where you're going to sit down and drink your coffee like you would at a Starbucks.
Yes. I've been a lot of those.
Yeah. Or you go in and you're going to get your fresh produce and stuff like that at your store. So you're going on a shopping trip for 20 minutes instead of, with COVID, I think we see more people not wanting to go into the bigger grocery stores. So I think we are seeing more people going down to the corner to go buy their bread and things like that. And so I expect we will see a transition of those turning more into like a small market that people will want to go into as opposed to the bigger stores, or turn into that coffee shop feel where you're going to sit down. And even with the Olympics this year in Japan, I know I'd seen several articles where people are like, the 7-Elevens in Japan are insane. You can get everything there. And very different culture there for what a 7-Eleven is versus what's across the US. So looking at some of those international convenience stores and fuel stations and what they've done and what really works there, I think we'll see more of that push come to the US, but I think it's going to require a complete thinking and culture change for us because we're used to it being the real quick, go buy your cigarettes and beer and lottery tickets and go home. Yeah.
In my area, there are lots of malls that are hosting charging kiosks. So you go to the mall, you probably do your grocery, and then while your car is charging. So it's kind of bringing it to the mall, not taking the shopping center. But both should work perfectly.
Yeah, that's going to be the big thing is getting the places. I think we'll see that big fight going on of whether people want to charge at the really quick, convenient places or whether they're going to want the chargers at the places they're already going to be for an hour. For people that are traveling, they're more likely jump off the highway, stop at a gas station, charge their car for 20 minutes and keep going. So for the commuting people, I think you're going to see more, they want that convenient, quick charging. But for the people that, if you're going to the mall, good time to plug in your car. You're going to be there for a while. If you're going out to dinner, plug in your car. You're going to be there for an hour probably. Same thing when you're at work. Office buildings should all have charging stations. And I think we're seeing more and more of that. The public parking garages usually are getting them now. So I think you're going to see that those two different areas, that you're going to have your areas that people are going there and they'll be there for a while, but then you're going to have the people that just want the quick convenience of get in real quick and charge the car and get out fast for the commuting.
Awesome. These are so exciting information, so exciting, visions. And I think it's soon, probably in a decade. What do you think the timeline would be? Like,
I think
see a complete transition.
I don't know. It's going to be interesting. We're starting to see the infrastructure starting to get put in. And I think within the next 5 years, we're going to see car charging very rapidly increasing, and it's going to be very common. I think that's going to go in really quickly. And especially when we have the new legislation coming in where they're trying to push the car manufacturers into doing it. Most of the car manufacturers are saying 10 to 15 years, they want to be all electric. California passed legislation that they aren't going to sell any more gas vehicles after 15 years or something. So we're seeing that the legislation pushes for it, and the manufacturers are in line with being able to produce the cars for that. So I think it's going to be a fairly quick transition to some extent. I don't know that we're ever going to see traditional fuel really get pushed out. I think that's always going to have to be there to some extent, maybe, or minimized, or it'll take a very long time to transition out. Mm-hmm. I think what we're going to run into on it though is we're going to see this push for all of these chargers going in, and I'm not sure that our overall electric infrastructure is there yet to handle that. And we don't hear about that part. So I think the technology is going to come, but we're going to see, already, even with power right now, we still have areas that have brownouts on a fairly regular basis during the summer when the energy is high and the power company can't keep up, or power companies telling people, well, we'd like you to try and reduce your power for the next couple of days because it's going to be too hot and everybody's running air conditioning. Well, when you have everybody trying to charge their car, 2 cars, I don't know that our current infrastructure is going to handle that additional load. So I think that's going to be the bigger slowdown, is getting our power companies to be able to produce the power to handle everybody trying to charge their cars at the same time. Even in the beginning of the year, we had Texas had their big storm that shut down power across the entire state. So you have something like that of what happens in that type of situation, where now all of a sudden everybody has no power, but they also don't have any vehicles to get out of their house and go get help or go get food. So we have safety concerns on that type of thing that I think we'll run into, of if everything's dependent on this one infrastructure system, if that infrastructure system fails, we're kind of left in the dark, literally and figuratively, on it. So I think there's some deeper issues in the infrastructure that's going to have to get resolved as we're going through this. I think we'll get the chargers coming, and I know that there's the infrastructure bills and all the government's trying to put a lot more money into improving infrastructures and the energy capacity. So I think it's going to get there, but I think that's really what's going to determine our timeline of, can that energy production be made in a way that can keep up with the demand of the electric cars?
Interesting. Nicole, another question I'm curious, and probably a lot of people are curious about, is how this transition is going to affect traffic, or if it's going to affect it anyway, or is it going to affect it or not?
I don't know that it will affect it much. I don't see that it's the change in the fuel types is going to affect the way people are commuting. You probably will see a lot more, like if you're doing long distance traveling, I imagine that our rest areas and travel stops and things like that are going to be much more crowded, because every 250 miles is going to have to stop and sit there and charge their car for half an hour. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. And then we're going to have to take into, when we're timing our traveling, instead of a 5-minute stop to fill up our gas tank, we need to count that into our travel time now. So I think we'll see more of like the long distance traveling that'll affect it more, but most of us don't have very long commutes. Most people that are driving their electric cars, they can get to work and do the grocery shopping and everything and get back home at the end of the day without having to worry about charging their car anywhere. So I don't think we'll see that big of an effect on it, especially on traffic and stuff like that. I don't think it's going to change the way that we're living our lives a whole lot. You might see more people that are more willing to commute, though, if they're not having to pay for gas. Or these days, with COVID, we're tending to go the other direction, where more people are working from home, and the technology is making it where it's easier to work from home.
Yeah.
So definitely. I think there's bigger changes in our world that'll have a bigger effect on that than what the vehicles will.
Yeah, probably public transportation, the technology of working from home, things like that would probably affect traffic more than having electric vehicles. So my last question is going to be, if you were to advise policymakers and legislators, what would you want to say to them about this topic?
I think that we're moving in the right direction with transforming our focus on energy production. I always see kind of this, electric vehicles are good and fuel is bad, but fuel is not that bad either. And they always do try to hide some of the details, and you have to really research to figure out the advantages and disadvantages of all the different technologies. So I think that we are moving in a good direction with it, but I think our policymakers need to kind of I would like them to be a little more open about the larger infrastructure part of it. Like I was saying, I have this worry that we're going to kind of hit a roadblock on it, where our bigger infrastructure technology is not there yet to handle all of this coming in. So it's very easy to say, yep, let's put all of these car charging in, and they haven't really been focusing on how to implement that the right way.
So they need to be focusing on working on the bigger infrastructure, maybe let's say neighborhood kiosks and stations similar to the ones in the multifamily or in the malls, but for, let's say, near the neighborhood park. If people don't want to do these modifications to their homes, or their homes are old and cannot take all that, probably something like that, or just come up with a plan for for a larger scale for the cities and to ease the transition.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, our power companies, they need to get where they can generate and store more power, which battery technology is getting better on that large scale too, where they have better batteries that they can store the power in on things. That's the other thing is a lot of us, we may end up doing solar panels on our house too, and maybe we'll have our own battery storage that we can use and not have to put that demand on the power companies so much. I mean, California is big for that one, where they've been pushing solar for several years now, but even that's a technology that's still getting better and is not quite as efficient as we need it to be yet. And I think as a larger planning system, I think right now, all of the car charging stations that are going in really are just being done independently by each development owner or whatever. And there's not really anybody looking at the larger scale of how many stations do we need? What spacing do we need on them? Should we have them at every corner? Or there really hasn't been a master plan, or I haven't really even seen any studies on, or at least very many sufficient studies on what that needs to be and what the ideal capacity and quantity and locations of those would be. It's just kind of right now, everybody just put them in. So I think there could be some bigger planning going into that to make it more efficient. And we don't necessarily need them on every corner. Where do we need them? Where are people going to use them? So it's not overloading our systems.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. This was really enlightening, great information and great expertise. Do you want to say something?
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm glad I can kind of share some of my insights of what I'm seeing going on. And I'm excited to see what changes come over the next 5 or 10 years. And I like the idea of being part of that change and the research of what's happening and what people aren't noticing in the background of all of it.
Wow, excellent. Congratulations. It's really interesting to do something that you love and passionate about. Well, thank you. Maybe we'll see you again in a couple of years to talk about this.
And it'll probably be completely different stuff to talk about, because I think it's going to change drastically.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, and goodbye to our viewers.
Yep. Thank you very much.